In 1944, one of Hitler's most gifted tank commanders made a fatal mistake. He told the Führer the truth. Field Marshal Paul von Kleist defied Hitler's orders during the collapse in Ukraine and was dismissed within weeks. But his greatest punishment came later, when he became one of the highest-ranking Nazi officers to die inside Stalin's prison system. Paul Ludwig Ewald von Kleist was born into a Prussian military family with generations of service. He began his career as a traditional cavalry officer in World War I, commanding a squadron on the Eastern Front at Tannenberg. When the war ended, most experts believed cavalry would remain the backbone of mobile warfare. Kleist disagreed. The 1939 invasion of Poland gave Kleist his first chance to test his ideas. As commander of the 22nd Motorized Corps, he applied cavalry tactics to the fast-moving motorized units. His forces struck Polish positions and pulled back before defenders could react, confusing both Polish troops and German observers expecting more conventional attacks. The success earned him greater responsibilities from the German High Command. Allied commanders believed that the Ardennes forest was an impenetrable barrier to tanks. Its dense woodland and narrow roads seemed impossible for large armored formations to navigate quickly. French planners trusted the Ardennes and the Maginot Line as enough protection against any eastern attack. Kleist disagreed. Despite debates with subordinates like Guderian over the Hauptstützpunkt, the main point of attack, he prepared for an unprecedented breakthrough. In early 1940, the German High Command formed Panzer Group Kleist, the first time in history multiple Panzer Corps were placed under a single command. Among them was Heinz Guderian's 19th Panzer Corps, concentrating unprecedented armored strength under one operational leader. No army had ever coordinated mechanized forces on this scale. At Sedan, Kleist coordinated the breakthrough with precision that surprised even his subordinates. In 3 days, his Panzer Group tore through French defenses, opening a 50-mile gap in Allied lines. The speed shattered French command structures and stopped organized counterattacks. Kleist kept strategic control while giving commanders like Guderian freedom to exploit openings. The breakthrough outflanked the Maginot Line and sent tanks through terrain Allied planners had dismissed as impassable. On July 19, 1940, Kleist was promoted to General Oberst and awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, recognition for his crucial role in France's swift defeat. Hitler praised him personally and counted him among Germany's most trusted field commanders. Kleist later reflected that his tactics had shortened the French campaign by many months. The maneuver collapsed French defenses and became the model for blitzkrieg on the Eastern Front. But his greatest test lay ahead, on the vast steppes of Russia, against an enemy unlike any he had faced. Operation Barbarossa began on June 22, 1941, with Kleist leading the 1st Panzer Group under Army Group South. His first clashes with Soviet defenders in Ukraine produced assessments that contradicted Nazi propaganda. In reports to the High Command, he called Soviet troops first-rate fighters with amazing endurance, capable of operating effectively even with limited resources. It was an appraisal that directly challenged the regime's belief that Slavs were inherently inferior and incapable of sustained resistance. His forces pulled off massive encirclements across Ukraine, breaking through the Stalin Line, a chain of Soviet border fortifications, and trapping entire Soviet armies. At Brody, Uman, and Kiev, the 1st Panzer Group captured hundreds of thousands of prisoners, seeming to confirm German tactical superiority and Hitler's prediction that the Red Army would collapse within weeks. The reality proved far different. Despite overwhelming disadvantages, Soviet formations refused to surrender and inflicted heavy casualties on German attackers. Their commanders coordinated defenses well and adapted quickly, learning from early defeats and implementing countermeasures within weeks. Tank crews improved coordination and began exploiting their equipment's advantages over German armor. Kleist's respect for Soviet capabilities showed in his equipment reports. He called the T-34 the finest tank in the world, noting its superior armor and firepower over German models. Soviet artillery impressed him with its accuracy and range, while infantry weapons like the SVT-40 rifle delivered faster rates of fire than German standard issue. All of it contradicted Nazi assumptions about Soviet industrial weakness. The cost of victory soon became clear. Within 3 months, German tank strength had fallen by half. Kleist's panzer divisions took heavy losses despite their successes, with replacements arriving slowly, while Soviet resistance stayed strong across multiple fronts. The intensity and attrition went far beyond German planning assumptions and strained the Wehrmacht to its limits. Kleist credited German success mainly to superior training, not racial superiority or better technology. His candid reports highlighted Soviet adaptability and their capacity for sustained resistance, putting him on a collision course with Hitler's unrealistic expectations. The widening gap between battlefield reality and Nazi ideology would soon force Kleist into choices that challenged the regime he served. In the oil-rich Caucasus, Kleist made decisions that would save thousands and put him at odds with Nazi leadership. Appointed commander of Army Group A during Case Blue in the summer of 1942, he replaced Wilhelm List that November, tasked with seizing Soviet oil fields in the mountains. The 1st Panzer Army drove toward Grozny and Baku, taking key locations like Rostov-on-Don, Maikop, Krasnodar, and the Kuban region. It was Germany's last major push to secure the resources to keep the war going. The Caucasus posed two problems: hostile terrain and a patchwork of ethnic groups. Nazi policy called for terror and exploitation. Kleist chose a different path. Instead of enforcing racial terror, he tried to win local support. He appointed two advisors, Ernst August Kostring and Oskar von Niedermeyer, both former military attachés to Moscow whose knowledge of regional cultures proved invaluable. It was a direct break from the Nazi habit of sending in SS officials to impose policies of mass persecution. His clashes with Nazi officials like Fritz Sauckel and Erich Koch over labor recruitment revealed the depth of his opposition to party ideology, as Kleist insisted that labor recruitment in his operational area remain truly voluntary, which infuriated both men who viewed his policies as undermining their brutal forced labor programs. The dramatic intervention at Nalchik Ghetto demonstrated Kleist's willingness to directly challenge the regime's campaign of persecution. When ordered to destroy the Mountain Jews, Kleist instead requested a re-examination of their racial classification by the Office of Racial Policy. Under his supervision, the Mountain Jews established a council that successfully convinced German authorities they belonged to the indigenous population of the Caucasus rather than the Jewish race. By defying orders to carry out large-scale attacks against local Jews and abolishing the Star of David in his zone, Kleist saved thousands, a stark contrast to the regime's racial terror. This humanitarian approach was a direct rejection of Nazi racial policy and drew fierce criticism from party officials and SS commanders who saw it as treason. Kleist believed cooperation worked better than terror for securing objectives and holding territory. That pragmatism would soon bring him into an even sharper clash with Hitler's increasingly unrealistic demands. The collapse of German defenses in Ukraine during March 1944 forced Kleist into the most dangerous position of his career. The Soviet Dnieper-Carpathian offensive had shattered German lines, recovering most of right-bank Ukraine while inflicting heavy casualties on Wehrmacht forces. The destruction of the salient, a bulge in the front line around Kryvyi Rih and Nikopol, cost Germany crucial mining operations and nearly encircled the reformed Sixth Army. With reserves of men and material exhausted, the military situation had become unsustainable. Hitler demanded impossible defensive stands, while Kleist recognized the strategic necessity of withdrawal to save his troops. The Führer ordered his armies to hold their ground despite the inevitable collapse of German defensive lines. Kleist asked permission to pull his forces back to more defensible positions, but Hitler refused. This clash between military realism and political directives represented the peak of growing tensions between Kleist's battlefield assessments and Hitler's increasingly unrealistic expectations. Kleist's career ended when he openly defied Hitler's no-retreat order during the Ukraine collapse. He insisted on pulling back Army Group A, a direct contradiction of orders to stand firm. The gap between battlefield reality and Nazi ideology was now unbridgeable. Kleist saw retreat as the only way to save his army. Hitler saw holding ground as a political necessity, even at the cost of these forces. On March 30, 1944, Hitler dismissed Kleist and replaced him with Ferdinand Schörner. The move showed how far the regime had drifted from Eastern Front reality, putting politics over strategy. His refusal to sacrifice his forces cost him his command, and within weeks, he went from trusted field marshal to persona non grata. American forces of the 26th Infantry Division captured Kleist in late April 1945 in Mitterfels and handed him over to the British Army. That summer, he was called to testify at the Nuremberg trials. In September 1946, Kleist was extradited to Yugoslavia, the highest-ranking Wehrmacht commander to face trial there. During proceedings, he testified that the 1941 bombing of Belgrade, known as Operation Retribution, was primarily political in nature and intended as an act of personal revenge by Hitler. He was convicted of war crimes and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Kleist's trial coincided with that of General Oberst Alexander Luhr. He had commanded German forces in southeastern Europe and overseen the Belgrade bombing. Luhr was sentenced to death in 1947 and executed alongside several junior Wehrmacht officers. Historians have since noted that while German forces committed terrible atrocities in Yugoslavia, much of the case against Kleist was politically motivated, and his personal guilt was never conclusively proven. In 1949, Kleist was extradited again, this time to the Soviet Union. There he became one of only 3 German field marshals ever captured by Soviet forces, alongside Ferdinand Schorner and Friedrich Paulus. Soviet prosecutors accused him of issuing criminal orders. In Krasnodar alone, Soviet prosecutors alleged his forces caused tens of thousands of civilian deaths and widespread destruction of infrastructure, farms, and public institutions. Kleist was sentenced to 25 years in a correctional labor camp. In 1952, his sentence was changed from a correctional labor camp to a prison term, and he was transferred to Vladimir Central Prison. The Soviet Supreme Court's military collegium called him a particularly dangerous criminal and ordered strict isolation. Paul von Kleist died of heart failure on November 13, 1954 in Vladimir Central Prison, one of the highest-ranking German officers to die in Soviet captivity. In October 1955, after Chancellor Konrad Adenauer's visit to Moscow, the Soviets returned his remains to Germany, along with other German prisoners convicted of war crimes. From battlefield triumphs to a prison cell in Stalin's Gulag, Kleist's story is proof that even the most brilliant commanders can't outrun the politics they serve. So here's the question: can great battlefield skill ever truly stand apart from the politics it serves, or is it always tied to them? If you enjoyed this story, explore our other videos on Germany's most infamous generals, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more untold stories of the war that shaped the modern world.